In 2008, a small production company called Summit Entertainment developed an adaptation of a vampire story by Stephanie Meyer, which was published in 2005. It was in many ways a traditional vampire horror romance story in the vein of Buffy and Angel, the story of a teenage human girl falling in love with a boy who happened to be a vampire. But the vampires in this particular story were different to many of the creatures we had seen in horror cinema previously. They were kind and considerate to humans. They refrained from drinking blood. They walked around during the day. And when exposed to direct sunlight, they sparkle. Much to the surprise of critics, audiences, and even the people that made the film, Twilight became a huge international and commercial success, drawing in a predominantly teenage audience who would queue round the block to see the film multiple times in the cinema. The film spawned 4 sequels released consecutively over the next 4 years, and while critics and horror fans continued to hate on these movies, their fan popularity only grew. The Twilight series went on to gross over $3.4 billion, making A-list stars of its 2 lead actors and solidifying its place as the most successful vampire franchise ever made.
I'm the world's most dangerous predator. Everything about me invites you in. My voice, my face, even my smell.
Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of the vampire, and we discuss the wholesome, twinkling world of Twilight. Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Munzer, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. We are currently in the middle of our 8th series, exploring the evolution of the vampire, and this is part 22. And in this week's episode, as that intro suggested, we're going to be discussing all 5 Twilight films. That's Twilight from 2008, New Moon, Eclipse, Breaking Dawn Part 1, and Breaking Dawn Part 2. I will say spoiler alert for all 5, but I won't say go and watch them all before listening to our discussion. So, I was very excited to discuss these films. I had never seen any of them, watched them for the first time for this episode, and I was very excited to sit down and discuss these movies with friend of the pod, Steph McKenna. So please enjoy mine and Steph's discussion of all things Twilight.
You're impossibly fast and strong. You gotta give me some answers.
I'd rather hear your theories.
I have considered radioactive spiders and kryptonite.
It's all superhero stuff, right? What if I'm not the hero? What if I'm the bad guy?
You know what you are. Your skin is pale white and ice cold. You don't go out into the sunlight.
Say it out loud. Say it.
Vampire.
Are you afraid?
No. This isn't real. This kind of stuff just doesn't exist.
Does in my world.
Hello, Steph McKenna. Welcome back.
Hi, Mike Munzer. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited.
Oh my God, I'm so excited to have you here. I always feel like I want to thank you / apologise to you, Steph, when you come onto this podcast, because we're either talking about really difficult stuff like David Lynch's Eraserhead, or really bad stuff like Rob Zombie's Halloween movies, or we're talking about 5 movies in one go like Phantasm or today's series, right? So thank you once again for taking one for the team to be here for Twilight Week.
Oh my God, thanks so much. It's always a joy. I like to be called a good sport. I'm just here for the validation, really. But it's always fun, isn't it? It's an adventure.
It is an adventure. Well, I had never seen any of these movies, Steph, so these were all first-time watches for me. And obviously, like, I was messaging you some of my reactions during watching them, but it's been quite a journey.
I have laughed so much. There have been trying to watch these through that added sort of prism of knowing that we would be talking about these in at least some form of serious way, just had me howling. Like I was crying. I felt like I'd fully lost the plot at points, and I was getting messages from you when I was at work when you were watching some of these, and it just. Oh, it was just setting me off. It's been an absolute blast already, and we haven't even got to talk about it yet. So
exactly.
Thanks for the experience.
No, I've been very excited for this. So let me start off by just before we get into Twilight, let's talk about vampires generally. Would you say you're a fan? Like, do you gravitate towards vampire movies generally?
I love vampires. I really do. It is. Vampire films have such nostalgia for me. I think growing up as a teenager who loved horror films and books, they were my absolute favourite movie monster and sub-genre bar none at the time. Possibly now, I think ghosts and hauntings maybe hit the post just a little bit, but... I remember being kind of 9 and 10 years old when Buffy the Vampire Slayer came out on BBC, 7 p.m. slot.
Yes.
And that was such a cornerstone of my childhood and my kind of teenage years. Like, that was my first taste of proper fandom, I think. Like, I got the books and the magazines and, like, my first merchandise. And I was, absolutely enamoured with it. All of those kind of teen vampire films that I kind of went through as a young adult, everything from Lost Boys to, Near Dark, Interview with a Vampire, Queen of the Damned, of course. Because, just, for better or for worse, Queen of the Damned especially, it's not exactly an amazing film, but all of these vampires were outsiders who were super cool and super sexy, and they had amazing outfits, and the soundtracks were brilliant, and I loved it so much. And then in my 20s, we had True Blood, of course, and Vampire Diaries. And I fell in love with Stephen King, and I reread Salem's Lot whenever I can. And it's just, and we've talked kind of last year on Patreon about Midnight Mass. And it's just, it's a monster that has always stuck with me and been there throughout most of my life. So I kind of treasure them really much, like a lot, actually. I feel a lot of love towards vampires.
Oh, I love that. That's great. How do you feel about the upcoming, there's a new film version of Salem's Lot that's coming out next year. Are you excited for this?
I am always sort of excited because I will try my hand at any Stephen King adaptation.
Yes.
But 75 of them are shocking, aren't they? 75% of them are shocking, aren't they? So I have no expectations whatsoever anymore. I've been disappointed too many times, so I'm just going to go in and roll with it, and we might be really pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, you never know. But you're right, like this recent run of like Firestarter, Pet Sematary, It Chapter 2 even, like it's not been great, has it? It's not been great.
No, I think that they're a hard thing to adapt, Stephen King novels, and Salem's Lot, the kind of extended TV miniseries, is great.
Banger.
So you're also attempting to remake something that's already pretty good. So it'll be interesting, but I'm always willing to give it a go.
And do you think, you talked about this already, like there is this element that vampires are cool, they are sexy. Is that kind of what makes vampires so popular, do you think? Like, why has it remained one of the most popular sort of monsters in cinema, do you think?
That's definitely one of the reasons. Making a monster really fucking hot and cool is, especially when you're younger, like you don't aspire to be a zombie, do you?
No.
It's not quite in the same way. I think you kind of do, there is a sort of aspirational nature there with vampirism, but I guess on a more serious note as well, it's been discussed 1,000 times that, horror, and you talk about it on this podcast, horror, looking at the ways in which horror films and monsters reflect social and political context of their time, and you can you can pick apart any monster movie and find something about what anxieties and fears were being faced by, the population at the time. But I think stories about vampires have always done that particularly well. So whether it's the fear of the foreign or of sexual disease or of homosexuality, like bodily autonomy, feminism, like I think it does a really good job of kind of portraying those anxieties. But what I think makes people really uncomfortable is that vampires represent your biggest fear, but you kind of find it sexy and alluring at the same time. So there's something about something or someone that is supposed to scare you, but you're you're fascinated and you kind of desire it at the same time. So it's that kind of push and pull of being attracted and repulsed by the thing that really freaks you out. So I think that's, for me as well, why vampires have existed and been so popular for so long. And they also address pretty existential questions, you know, the purpose of life, who you really are, whether we're good or evil, whether God exists. That's pretty mortifying and horrifying in itself. So and we're never going to answer those questions. So we're always going to be sort of grappling with them and wanting to talk about them. Yeah,
I love that. Next week we're talking about films like Only Lovers Left Alive and those kind of films that are just sort of more about like the monotony of being a vampire and what it means to actually never age and die, right, as well. And that in itself is kind of interesting to explore too.
Yeah, you know? We've definitely entered that era of like, the monotonous, existential, depressed vampire.
Exactly.
And I'm here for that as well.
I know. Well, there you go. Well, speaking of, you know, existential depression, let's talk about Bella and Twilight, shall we? So Twilight from 2008, obviously we're going to predominantly start by talking about the first film and then we'll briefly talk about the rest as well. So first of all, Steph, just set the scene for us. What is the original Twilight all about?
I like that we're laughing already. Yeah. I don't know why. It's so funny. It's just so funny. Okay, so Twilight is about Bella Swan, and she is a normal, a bit awkward 17-year-old who relocates from sunny Phoenix, Arizona, which is where her mum is based. And she moves to Forks in Washington State to live with her dad, Charlie, who's the sort of police chief of the town. And she's starting at a new school and she's trying to find her feet with her friends, which can, you know, is always very difficult, especially when you're a clumsy teenager who already feels out of place. But she's trying to make new friends, get settled in this strange place, and she's introduced to this person called Edward Cullen and his siblings, and they're this very mysterious, very attractive family all of the siblings have sort of been adopted and raised by the local doctor, Carlisle, and Bella is immediately attracted to Edward, immediately drawn in by him. Unfortunately, he seems to be completely repulsed by her in every way initially, like looks like he's physically going to throw up. But as time goes on, they find themselves drawn together, and then there's this freak accident in the school car park where Edward saves Bella from an out-of-control van, and she begins to realise that Edward and his family aren't regular people. They are vampires, and when they begin to date, it brings a heap of trouble to the Cullens' doorsteps because they've introduced this human to their family, and it brings trouble to Bella because she's suddenly this target for other monsters because of what she knows and what she means to Edward. And then some very, very mild peril ensues.
Such mild peril. I love it. Yes. There's not a huge amount of action in this first film, is there really?
Nope.
Let's be honest.
Nope. Or across all five, let's be honest. We'll get that out of the way. Not a lot happens.
Not a lot happens. And yet they're all 2 hours and over, every single film. So there you go.
I'd forgotten when I put the first one on. I was like, at least, you know, usually with these kinds of things, the first one's like an hour and a half and then you're kind of getting into it. And I put it on and I was like, fucking 2 hours 10. Yes. The first film.
Yes, this is the first one. I know. Unbelievable. So what is your history with this, Steph? Like, were you sort of around target age when this became a thing, or like how did you first discover it and what are your thoughts generally?
So when it first came out in 2008, it would have been my second year of uni maybe, so 18, 19, so I was slightly outside the YA bracket. But I mean, this is going to either endear me to people or they're just going to hate my guts from the start. But I saw it quite a few times at the cinema, Mike.
I love it. No, this is good. This is why you're here.
I know. I mean, it's from day dot, I knew it was completely preposterous, but it had such a funny bonding effect with my female friends. I saw it a few times with a few different people, and we just kind of loved it for how fucking stupid and horny it was. I mean, you know me, I love talking about horny pop culture, and this was just like a real moment for that. And then it was the books, because they are based on books. The books were the first thing I read after I finished my English masters. I was like, I have to read some dross, and I read that, and I know a few people who did that as well. So it was something that we read after spending 4 years having to take literature seriously. And Yeah, so I have to say it was a moment, and then I have obviously seen it multiple times since. I really rewatched it during lockdown, and Wes was absolutely adamant that he would not have anything to do with it, and then ended up sitting on the sofa and watched every single one with me. So you cannot deny
there you go.
There is some kind of allure there, something. It's ludicrous, it's overly dramatic, it's corny, it's occasionally quite boring. Occasionally, it is quite boring, but it does. Yeah. It does have a special place in my heart. I don't feel particularly defensive of it because I know it's bad, but I kind of appreciate it for tapping into that real all or nothing, like ultra emo mentality of being a teenager. So yeah, I'm not precious with it, but yeah, I've seen it a few times, whereas you've not seen it before.
I love it. I'm
an expert.
Well, and I was sort of probably similar age to you. I think I was second year of uni as well. Thought of myself as far too cool to go and see the new Twilight film at the cinema, and I just sort of actively avoided all of those films. But I have to admit, I have always been kind of intrigued, and I was sort of low-key quite excited when I decided to do a series on vampire films, because it kind of gave me a reason to have to sit down and watch these films, and I was kind of intrigued.
So it was in your original shortlist? You were like, have to cover that?
From the get-go, because I think, and we'll talk about this, but I think regardless of what you feel about the films, they're so important, right, to pop culture, to teen culture, to the vampire subgenre, you know, so I think, you know, you can't avoid them. I almost feel like there's kind of there's pre-Twilight and there's post-Twilight, you know, in a way. So it's
so is.
Yeah, so it's so important to talk about. So I was excited. So I sat down and watched this film. I mean, I didn't love it. Let's be honest, I didn't love it. It's not, you know, but it wasn't for me. This is the thing. It's not made for me.
That's the point, right?
Yeah.
Like, who is this for? It's not for... I mean, it was barely for me. I got sucked into it, but I think it's in my DNA somehow. But, I mean, yeah, who is this for? You can't be too insulted when you know it's not designed for you.
Absolutely. And, you know, so I'm the wrong generation. I'm probably the wrong gender. You know, like, there's a reason why it didn't necessarily work for me as it does for clearly so many people. But that's not to say that I don't love a bit of this kind of stuff. Like you, I grew up as a massive Buffy fan, and the Buffy Angel tortured romance is like some of the best television I've ever seen, right? So, you know, it's not that.
It's kind of the same thing, but for a younger audience. You're taking a step back, you know, we're talking like 13-year-old girls here. Like, it's, you know, Buffy and Angel was probably a bit adult for me when I was watching it. So it's the same thing. So
you know, like there's been a huge tradition of this kind of thing, and I get it. But I did laugh a lot watching it, particularly this first film, and we'll talk about it as we go. But just like some of the choices, like the Catherine Hardwicke directed it, which I think is really interesting. And I was reading up about how you know, when the production company were making this film, they had no idea of how big it was going to be, apparently. And I think they gave it to this woman to direct, thinking that it was just like this little indie project that probably wouldn't go anywhere. And then, of course, it became the biggest thing ever. And then, depressingly, because of that, the rest of the series is directed by men, right? That was it. Like, she didn't get to direct any of the others, even though she literally kind of set the mold for this film. But I think the choices that she makes in the direction are hilarious. Like, there's like slow-mo, there's like CGI, everything's got a blue filter on it, there's extreme close-ups, there's like needle drops every 2 seconds. It's like exhausting to watch. But I kind of thought to myself, is this quite a good kind of, I don't know, manifestation of what it's like to be in the brain of a teenage girl, maybe? You know, maybe it is. That was kind of how it made me feel, because I kind of felt exhausted by the end. Do
you know what? That is exactly what it's like. And there's tons of handheld camera, which is also, so Catherine Hardwicke, I think the only thing that I'd seen of hers before this was 13. I was obsessed with the film 13 again when I was younger. And again, far too adult, really, but I was obsessed with that. So she does have this kind of experience of making films about teenage girls, and it feels like quite. And when I say adolescent filmmaking, I don't mean like a teenager running around with a camera, but it's that's a bit awkward, it's shaky, it's, you know, the sort of the context of like the nervous teenager.
Yes.
You say lots of very close shots of faces. It's like this real physical intimacy between Edward and Bella. Like it really accentuates the high emotional stakes of this film.
Right, right. And actually a film that basically, as you've kind of pointed out, doesn't really have much at stake, to be like, it doesn't really have a lot going on in this film, and yet the filmmaking makes every decision and every scene feel like life or death, because it's so dramatic and melodramatic, isn't it? And that's clearly that worked for a teenage female, predominantly, I imagine, audience, right?
I think if I had been like 12, 13 when this came out, I would have lost my shit. I truly would have been like, this is how I feel at school about this boy. I've been there. It is life and death. It was like being a robot that's just controlled by this huge crush you have on someone. It's devastating. It's a truly weird thing to be in the mind of a teenage girl. I mean, teenagers generally, but yeah, teenage girl is quite a unique experience. So I kind of respect the direction and the direction of this film for that. I mean, the filter is, I mean, if they'd done blue-grey filter for 5 films, I think I would have had to switch it off. But it's, you know, it's just, you know, it's cold and overcast. It's like Forks, man. It's like Bella's really isolated, and it's like the coldness of a vampire's skin. It's like,
oh, I love it. It's so emo, isn't it? It's so emo,
and it's so incredibly emo.
It brought me back to the sort of mid 2000s when, you know, emo music and culture, it really was quite a thing too, wasn't it? I think I was thinking of like Gerard Way and people like that, and I just feel like this movie kind of just like really taps into that era as well, you know.
It really does. I don't know if you've ever you probably haven't done a lot of research on Stephanie Meyer, who wrote the books, but I think she was like 30 when she wrote these books, so she's only a little bit younger than us. But honestly, she must have had the brain of a 16-year-old girl, because she cites her influences as like Wuthering Heights and Pride and Prejudice, and she was listening to soundtracks of My Chemical Romance, and
there you go.
You're just like, holy shit, you really did. You were in that mindset. So it is like the ultimate spell of all of these elements. Like the soundtrack of this movie is banging for the time, I have to say. It's like getting Paramore together with some like handsome, moody guy and a bunch of like shaky close-ups. And it's just like, it's a formula for crazed, hormonal young women.
It's so good. And don't forget, Steph, Claire de Lune, Edward's favourite tune is Claire de Lune as well, which he plays a lot.
I was swooning in my chair. I was like, oh my god. He's so learned. He listens to classical music.
Oh, what a guy. We'll get to Edward in a minute. I just wondered as well, like, how good an adaptation is it? Obviously, I apologise, I have not read the books, but as somebody that's read the book, how decent an adaptation is it of the original story?
I cannot believe I've read the books. It's just so from memory, I can't say, I have not reread them. I do think the first book and the first film are very similar. I think most of the films actually are quite similar to the book, but the first one in particular, things like some of the terrible one-liners in this film. I mean, there is some fucking atrocious script in this film, but it is from the book. They are key lines from the book that I think Catherine Hardwicke knew that if she cut them out, people would be coming for her blood. And I think there is, so it's some of those key lines, and I think some of this film is probably quite boring because a lot of the book is Bella's internal monologue. And I think reading about feelings is just, you know, that kind of works in a way that watching feelings does not. But it's very similar, and it embodies very much the kind of angst and horniness of the book. So I think,
is it well written, would you say, or not?
No, it's absolutely terrible. Like really, really, really bad. There's that really funny quote where Rob Pattinson said he read the book and was like, I could not believe this was published. Like, how? And I'm not really sure. I could kind of... I don't know how it got published. I can understand why books like it got published after the success of this book. But how this one happened, someone must have shown it to their teenage daughter and she just went like, I love this book so much, we have to publish it. Like, something must have happened because it's so fucking bad. It's terrible.
It's so funny. But yeah, you're right. I mean, like, it created such a wave, didn't it? It kind of is the beginning of what we now call YA, isn't it? In a way, I suppose you had the popularity of stuff like the Harry Potter movies before this, but then post this, you get Divergent, Hunger Games, Maze Runner, all of these things that basically feel like just Twilight, but just in a different context.
It's the same formula, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. It was the birth of a whole movement. Love it or not, it is huge, and it's made a fuckload of money.
Oh my god,
made a lot of money.
Has it ever? Let's talk about Bella then, our heroine. A lot of people would call a bit of a problematic heroine, maybe at the centre of this franchise. But what do you think of Bella as a character?
So the thing is, I think I used to hate Bella when I was younger, and I think I was probably mostly jealous that she had like lots of different men fawning over her. But and you have to remember that they are, she's trying to do her best with some bad material here. But what to say about Bella? She's clumsy, she's awkward, she feels very alienated, she's very monotone. She's a very monotone person. It's very like, I mean, for someone who's clearly going through something very emotional, it is quite flat. But I sympathise with her, and I do like this idea of her sort of being a person who feels that she doesn't quite fit in. She's trying to fit in here. She really didn't feel like she fit in Arizona. I think like her friend Jessica at one point is just like, aren't people from Arizona supposed to be like really tanned? Like, she's clearly just an outcast wherever she's been. She comes to Forks, and all of these boys, like these horny teenagers, they're all like falling over her. They're just obsessed with her, and she's trying to kind of make her way and build a life. And then she sees Edward for the first time in the cafeteria in, I think, probably the first ultra dramatic slow-mo scene of the film, where he comes in through the cafeteria door, and it's all like high drama of seeing your crush for the first time. Everything slows down, and then she's just completely obsessed with him in the most ridiculous way. But that's young love, isn't it?
Well, this is it. And like, I think I started off by thinking this is terrible. Like, the writing is so paper thin that we basically know nothing about this character really, other than that she's a bit miserable and loves somebody, basically, and that basically defines her. But then I kind of thought, is that actually sort of genius? Because I think what you get then is this kind of like blank slate character that I imagine everyone reading it or watching it can almost imprint themselves onto, right? That she is just this... She is basically defined by the fact that, like you said, she's a bit awkward, she's a bit miserable, let's be honest, her whole world revolves around this boy, and again, I guess it's like there is something in that inherently that a lot of people can really relate to, especially when they're of that age, There
totally is. It is a thing. Like, I was thinking about pop culture today, and figures like Harry Styles. People like Harry Styles because he's a mystery. He's not too defined, so people can kind of project whatever they want on him. I think we're probably just making excuses for poor characterization here, but the lack of definition to her character does mean that you can totally insert yourself into that situation. Yeah,
and you're right. I mean, we are making excuses for poor characterization, but the fact of the matter is that it worked, right? Like, it worked for millions and millions and millions of book readers and film watchers. So there must be something about that character of Bella that girls or other audiences members could relate to in some way, I suppose,
And as the films go on, and we might talk about this, but I guess the main thing about her character is that she has this lack of confidence and self-belief. But she does know what she wants. And as the film goes on, we see her make decisions that are not always the one that are sort of perceived as best to her, best for her, but they are what she wants. I mean, why she wants Edward Cullen is honestly beyond me. But that is what she wants, and she makes the decisions for her against other people's advice, and it is problematic, and we will go into that, but I guess that is supposed to be the crux of the character, really, is that she becomes
Totally.
I don't know, she becomes more self-assured, and she knows her own mind as the journey goes on.
She basically just wants to die from film 1 onwards, though, doesn't she?
They both do.
All she wants is it the second one where she just keeps trying to like throw herself off a cliff or get into a motorbike crash?
They're both so bad. Like,
my God.
Edward's the same. He's just like, do you know what I'm really into? Suicide. I just really love suicide. It's like, Jesus Christ, this is...
Jesus Christ, guys.
Just...
So what? Let's talk about Edward. What is he? 130-year-old who still goes to school and still has a crush on a schoolgirl. But anyway, what do you make of Edward?
Imagine being stuck at school for 130 years. I just truly lose my... Maybe I'd be really boring too. I remember when I watched these, I was so pro Edward, and now I'm like, what? Why? What? I don't know. Maybe I was just really rooting for the idea of being in love, especially with someone ultra broody and emo, obviously. Rob Pattinson really is trying to go for the dark and broody here, and his performance veers between sort of constipation and having a toothache. Which I guess is because he's trying not to kill his girlfriend. But the facial expressions, it doesn't matter how many times I see them, they are so funny.
So funny. My absolute favourite thing, I think I even had to take a photo of it and send it to you, is that moment which you've mentioned already, when Bella walks into the classroom in front of the fan, and the fan like wafts her smell towards him and he just can't handle it. It's absolutely amazing.
He grabs his nose and it's like, poor.
So good. Poor Bella. Oh my God.
Poor, what was it? It was when you texted me, I just got in capitals poor cow.
Yeah.
He's just been that's poor cow.
Is there anything worse for a teenage girl than to have the hot boy be absolutely repulsed by your smell to the point where they ask to be moved?
Sniffs a jumper and is like, oh, I feel so bad for her. What an absolute meanie. But it is really, really funny. But I also can't work out whether he just looks pain because Rob Pattinson is really hating this entire process. So he might just be fed up.
Yes. Well, this is really funny, right? And you pointed out to me that I think both of them, right? But particularly Rob Pattinson has really kind of not hidden his feelings, right, about how shit he thinks the Twilight films are. Basically, even at the time, apparently, he was pretty mean about them.
I mean, trying to get him to do press junkets must have been
hilarious.
His PR people must have been tearing their hair out because he hates it. He thinks the whole thing is mad and baffling. And that's part of the fun now.
Yeah.
Is watching him squirm.
Like you said, it's amazing, isn't it? Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson, what an amazing job they've both done of kind of, I don't know, sort of escaping the shackles of this franchise and going on to have these, they are now two properly respected actors, aren't they, in kind of really interesting movies. It's so interesting.
How they didn't just crash and burn after this, is, I mean, I guess maybe it is testament to, how great they are at acting, but you would have thought this would happen, then it would just take a nosedive and that would be it for their career.
I kind of feel like Daniel Radcliffe is still not quite escaped the Harry Potter kind of shadow, right, looming over him, everything he does. And he's trying to do that same thing. He keeps making really interesting choices and he's in really interesting films. But I don't think it quite has worked for him in the same way that Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart, you can almost forget now that they were in these Twilight movies,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I wonder why that is. I don't have an answer, by the way, but I just wonder why that is, because you're so right.
I think maybe they are better actors than Daniel Radcliffe, to be honest. I think that might be part of it. Sorry, Daniel Radcliffe. He's lovely.
Daniel seems like the nicest guy. Well done, Daniel.
Well done, Daniel. Well done for being a nice man. Exactly. But I think they are genuinely good actors. you wouldn't necessarily know.
You
that
wouldn't
by
know
watching.
It's so bad.
It's so bad.
Like, it's like, is it bad material? Is it bad? I just, it seems like a marriage of the whole thing. It's just bad through and through.
Yeah.
But and yet I still enjoy it.
Well, it's it's fascinating, isn't it? That's the thing about that film. It's like a car crash that you can't quite look away from, and it is really fascinating. Like the choices that are being made in like the performances, the direction, everything. It's so funny. And Edward, you've already mentioned this, but like, what is the appeal of Edward? Again, like, what is it about him, other than the fact that he's played by handsome, dishy Robert Pattinson, right? But beyond that, is there anything? What attracts people to him in this franchise?
It's quite a hard question, actually, because it's surprising that for a man that is so compelling to Bella on first sight, he has absolutely no personality, like no discerning, like apart from jealousy and rage,
yes,
which I will monologue about shortly, there is almost nothing there. And I'm kind of left thinking, is it just the fact? I think he does reference at one point, he says, everything about me is like designed to draw you in. And I'm like, oh my God, maybe it's just the allure of being a vampire. His superpowers, he looks gorgeous and he's able to radiate this kind of energy that draws humans to him. What if that is literally just it? And their whole relationship is because she is drawn to him by some sort of supernatural ability and he wants to eat her. And actually, that's it.
That's literally it. Yeah.
What else is there? He has no hobbies. Apart from Claire de Lune, obviously. He's got no hobbies. He's got no sense of humour. There's nothing there. There's
nothing there. And there are quite a lot of, as you pointed out, quite a lot of red flags about this guy too, right?
Honest to God, I'd said to you, like, I think I'm going to bring like a little red flag to just Again, as a teenager, I kind of readily jumped on this as a sort of brooding Victorian romance between two people who are willing to die for one another. And then rewatching it as an adult, we watched it during lockdown, which is the first time in years that I'd watched it. And I was like, Edward is so controlling. Like when you're watching these films, the red flags get bigger and bigger until you're just sort of waving like a giant red blanket in her direction. It's like a checklist of psychologically manipulative and abusive behaviour. There's like, I've written a list. So there's gaslighting. So after the car accident, he kind of, she's saying, this is what I saw. And he's like, no one's going to believe you. You didn't see that. You've imagined it. Yeah. He's breaking into her room unannounced and watching her sleep.
Very weird.
He's getting really like irrationally angry when she's clumsy. Mm-hmm. There's like unpredictable mood swings. His driving is absolutely unhinged. He clearly has anger. He keeps going on about how very protective he feels of her. And then there's this one scene which I don't think is supposed to make me feel sad, but kind of did, which is there's like a slow-mo shot of her in the car with him, watching her friends all out together having fun. Yes. And she's kind of in this truck with him and he's got his arm round her really possessively. And I was like, this is just a film about like domestic abuse.
Yeah. It's really sad. I thought that was sad too. And then I realised I'm not sure that that's what the film wanted me to think.
I think it's supposed to be like, look at me with my wonderful... and all these like immature teenagers hanging out together and I'm with my super cool vampire boyfriend. But I was just very concerned.
Go hang out with Anna Kendrick. Don't be sitting in the dark with Robert Pattinson,
She seems like a laugh. Anna Kendrick seems like a laugh in this film. It just... But I don't get... It's funny when you watch it as an adult and go, well, shit, this is like, I would make my child watch this so that I could sit them down afterwards and go, if anyone does any of these things to you, you run the other way because this is not okay.
Totally. And such a big chunk of this film, when basically nothing happens, is just about her getting to know him and then slowly learning that he is a vampire and then learning all about what it means to be a vampire, right? So there's a lot of like exposition in this film as well, isn't there, really?
There's so much.
what kind of vampires do we get here? You've got Edward and then his whole family who we meet as well, who are all vampires. And I love the choices that Stephanie Meyer has made about, the in terms of vampire rules and vampire lore and that kind of thing in this.
Yeah. I mean, we get a kind of sounds like a bit of a stretch, but we do get a kind of vampire that owes a lot, I think, to kind of Anne Rice and the sort of brooding beauty of Brad Pitt in Interview with the Vampire, but through the eyes of a much younger target audience. So you've got that kind of, beautiful broodiness. It obviously owes a lot to the era of sort of teen vampirism with kind of Lost Boys and Near Dark, which brings those vampires to teenagers and into kind of schools and neighbourhoods. And I think I sort of mentioned Stephanie Meyer had sort of cited, like Charlotte Bronte and sort of those kinds of books as her own inspiration. So again, it's this kind of like gothic romance, vampires as brooding and tortured and beautiful. But the monstrous aspect of vampires is almost, it is completely dulled. These aren't vampires that, look beautiful, but when you see them in their true form, they're actually hideous monsters. They're actually more beautiful in their true form in the sunlight. So when you see them for what they really are, they're even hotter, apparently.
So funny.
So they're like PG-rated vampires. So, I don't know, instead of slapping on like a parental advisory, they've just cut all the monstrous and the sexy stuff out. We're in we're in teenage emo vampire territory. So you've got the physical appeal, the design to draw people in. You've got some super strength.
Yes. Jumping and leaping. Spider monkey.
Lots of jumping and leaping. Lots of spider monkey moves, yes. You've got... They drink blood, although they do not, because they are vegetarians. And they are living on an animal-only diet.
Yes.
They are immortal. They have cold skin. They don't sleep. There's they sort of avoid sunlight. So the tropes are there, but the monstrousness and the violence and the sex and that sort of push and pull of desire and repulsion that I mentioned, that bit is not there. We get like, I don't know, a good 9 minutes of sort of hissing and biting at the end with James and his kind of vampire clan. But there are no fangs. No. There is nothing. We're certainly not. There's a lot of pining and desire in this film, but we are certainly not drawing together, sex and violence. There's none of that. We are in firm, censored vampire territory.
Absolutely. And this, I think this is the crux of why a lot of people really hate Twilight. And I want to talk about this as we go, because I think there is, we've talked about how this film is ridiculous. Of course it is. But there is almost a kind of like disproportionate amount of hatred, I think, from fandoms or whatever towards the Twilight franchise. And I wonder if part of it, at least from the sort of horror perspective, is that they made vampires so clean and sanitized. Like you say, like the epitome of this is that when they go out in the daylight, they don't burst into flames, they don't burn up, they don't catch fire, they sparkle, they twinkle, right?
They sparkle! They're like the Barbie and Ken version.
Yes. Yes.
You're right, they're super sanitized, aren't they? Everything
it's interesting, isn't it? Because like you talked about, this movie is sort of, there is a kind of horniness about it, but also at the same time it's kind of sexless as well, isn't it? Like it's so Stephanie Meyer is a Mormon, right? And I think that it feels, and we'll get into this, I think there are many reasons as to why these stories feel like they were written by a Mormon.
Yeah. So much. It's the celibacy, isn't it? It's not even, I don't think across the whole franchise, I don't think they use the word sex. They just can't talk about it. They sort of gesture about it awkwardly. It's like this unmentionable thing. And yeah, you can pine and you can want all you like, but absolutely cannot cross that threshold into actual physical activity in any way. Like they look physically pained just kissing each other. Like that's,
well, it's so funny as
physically painful.
There is this, like, again, I suppose quite on the nose metaphor, and this is the same in all vampire films, but like this idea that kind of biting is essentially like sexual, and basically it feels like there is this on the nose metaphor that that Robert Pattinson, that Edward is so horny to bite her, but he can't. He has to resist from biting her, and they want to wait until they're married before he can bite her and turn her into a vampire, right? And it's this whole franchise basically feels like it's sort of about abstinence and celibacy, doesn't it? All the way through to the end there when she has her baby with him.
It really, really does. And it's it's a choice, isn't it, to write a book about vampires, but the vampires are the one, well, Edward in particular is the one kind of enforcing the celibacy.
Yeah.
Which I think is quite strange. So the vampire is the one that's like, yo, we're not doing this. And the teenage girl is like, come on, let's get going. And he's like, nah, like, can't. So it's an interesting choice to make the vampire the celibate one.
Yeah.
Really.
And I think it's, and the film has been like endorsed by, the Christian faith and various other kind of the religious right too and stuff. And I think there is that, whether it's intentional or not, but I think there is that just inherent slight conservatism to these stories, I think.
There really is. It's very odd. And there's a whole, I'm sure we'll talk about it later, there's a whole pro-life storyline in there as well, which is...
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a bit hairy.
God. It's
very uncomfortable to watch, very on the nose as well. But it's it really is trying its best to kind of reinforce, especially the books. I have to say, I mean, they really are trying to reinforce those conservative viewpoints, which is very bizarre. And funny choice. Because it's whipped like millions of young teenagers into like a horny frenzy.
I guess it's kind of, again, like for young teenagers, there's something that is kind of quite safe about it, isn't it? It's like, it's kind of sexy, but it's not too sexy. It's not like embarrassingly sexy. You can still kind of read it in front of your parents because it's not like outrageously sexy. There's something about, again, it's like, it's for a particular age group, I think, isn't it? And it's maybe just horny enough if you're a confused 13-year-old.
Little bit of horny. Just your first taste of horny. Exactly. An introduction to horny in horror. No, and would I class this as a horror film? I mean, I'm like you in that I could class anything as a horror film, really. So I'm a poor example, but no, probably not. It's it's a coming of age drama that uses kind of vampire tropes, really, doesn't it? It's not a horror film, so that's probably why I don't find it that insulting. That, and I have been a teenage girl.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're right. Like it's. Yeah, I mean, it's. There are things about it, like you say, it's using horror tropes. It's not necessarily a film designed to unsettle or scare or repulse. No. In fact, all the opposites of those things, I think, probably, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's probably why some people have been cross. I got some cross. I even, like, this is what makes me laugh. And this comes back to this idea of there is this, like, real anger about this series of films. And that is what I find really fascinating to dive into, because it's like, what is that? And I think there is an inherent kind of like slight prejudice towards films that are just very openly aimed at women and at young girls specifically, right? I'm sure that is part of it. And maybe it's just that it kind of, like I said, sanitized kind of that, a classic horror monster a little bit. But so did Interview with the Vampire, and people don't get that upset about Interview with the Vampire. But with this, I actually got an email, and I won't say who it was from. I won't read it because I didn't get their permission. But they were literally like, I'm really disappointed that you're covering the Twilight films. Here is the list of reasons why you shouldn't. And they gave me a numbered list, and it was like, number one, it is not a horror film. It is a romance. Number two, it's so poorly directed, blah, 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 blah. Don't give this more attention than it needs. And all this stuff. And it was just really, really... And he was like, suffice to say, I will not be listening to that episode and stuff. And I've had a few tweets from people saying that too. They're like... So I don't know if anyone's listening to us right now, Steph, to be honest. I have no idea. But it's... I get a lot of people that often write in to say they were disappointed that I didn't cover a certain film or that I missed something out. Yeah. But to actually actively get angry that we're talking about a film that people just don't like, there is a real vitriol towards these movies that I just can't get my head around,
I know. And I think you were right. Like, the sanitation of the vampire, I think that's totally, totally true. And totally get that is aggravating and frustrating. Again, I think because of if it was an adult film that had sanitized vampires, I'd be pissed too. But I can't help but remember who the target audience is here. And it really is like, it's quite young viewers. And they're, and I had to fight my own kind of internalized misogyny for a while when it comes to the, things that are perceived as like enjoyed by young girls. It's like, it's silly. And I think one of the reasons why these films have been so popular with that demographic is because it does take it seriously. And it's not just a film aimed at them, but these films aren't making fun of the feelings that, we're making fun of Edward and Bella, but the films are taking it very, very seriously. It's so
earnest, isn't it? That's why it's easy to laugh at.
It really is. Yeah. And it's hilarious, but do you know what? Taking teenage girls seriously and their interests and their feelings is a big deal, and it's important. And I think that's what draws people in so much. And there is maybe with some people, not with everyone, there is some misogyny there, or there's something about, we don't want to take teenage girls seriously, and we don't want to take their interests seriously. And again, that's not everyone's driver, but that as a society, I mean, we've been reckoning with that since forever, and this was a big turning point.
Well, it's so funny too, because money shows just how wrong that is, right? Because look at James Cameron's Titanic, look at the Twilight films, look at the Hunger Games films, look at the Pitch Perfect films. It's like when you look at these movies that are, stereotypically, let's say, like aimed towards a kind of teenage girl audience, they become like the biggest grossing films ever, because like, surprise, teenage girls don't get a lot of films maybe made for them. And then when they do get good ones, they will go to the cinema, not just once, but like you said with your friends, multiple times to go and see films like these.
And buy the merchandise. And, it completely redefined fandom. It just like absolutely exploded. And then when you're an adult, you kind of end up like me. I mean, I don't think I've gone and seen a kind of YA film in the cinema for a while, but I would certainly, watch back and watch a film like this and enjoy it for what it is, as a kind of like slice of sort of weird nostalgia. I really feel for those. I fucking know how hard it is to be a teenage girl, and I want them to be taken seriously as well. So, I think I genuinely don't know why people get that. But I think the one thing I would say that I can also understand is bothersome is, I'd be interested to know whether there was a period after these films where people didn't really want to touch vampire as a property because it had too many connotations. It was too connected to Twilight, so they're like, we can't do anything about vampires for a while. It was kind of putting people off. I can get that. That is frustrating because it was sort of tarnished. The idea of the vampire was tarnished. But like, really, I don't think it's made that. It hasn't ruined vampires, has it?
No, it's so interesting.
What has the impact been?
No, I mean, I think you're right. I think no one wanted to go. Well, what's really interesting is that in the same year, in 2008, on the big screen you had Twilight, and on the small screen you had True Blood, right? And these two like hugely successful vampire romances, and I know True Blood does have a lot more racy adult stuff going on in it, but essentially it does sort of become a love triangle with Eric and Bill and Sookie.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
It's literally the same thing, Mike. It's just got boobs in it. That is all it is. Yeah. And I love that as well. But also, it's the same year that we had Let the Right One in. So,
well, this is the thing.
Like, we're not suffering as a genre here.
No, and I think that's what happened. And maybe it's sort of, you could argue this has happened since the 90s, but like the vampire movies became sort of polarized, where you got the really big mainstream things. You got Blade, Interview with the Vampire, Twilight, and then you got these like little foreign language indie films like Let the Right One In, Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, Thirst. Yeah. And it's either one or the other. And it probably and it probably wasn't until, recent stuff that Mike Flanagan has done that has kind of brought vampires back into being these kind of scary things that people can take seriously again.
So fascinating. But the anger is it's just really fascinating to me. It's fine. You skip one episode, you'll be all right.
Well, it's and like, you know, the movie is ridiculous, but you know, people embrace ridiculous films. Like, look at like Room by Tommy Wiseau, or you know, 1,000,001 Nicolas Cage films, or whatever. Like, there are loads of films that are as stupid and melodramatic as this film, and yet those films, people completely embrace them, right? And so it's just really interesting that the level of vitriol, like we say, towards these, really interesting.
I think the biggest problem with these films is just that they're boring. They are really boring.
They are really boring.
Okay, get angry that you were very bored. That's fine.
Yeah,
but
maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe they're not bad enough in some regards, because they do get, especially the second one. I really struggled, Steph, with the second one, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Let me just quickly wrap up on this first film. Just a couple more things I want to ask you about, but what do you think of our other characters? There's a massive supporting cast. We get introduced to Jacob, obviously, briefly in this film, don't we? But then we also meet all of Edward's family. We've got Bella's dad, Charlie. You know, any faves amongst our supporting characters?
I'll try not to laugh. Charlie, massive dilf. Absolute hottie, hottest guy in the whole franchise.
Unbelievable! I was
God.
watching these with Rihanna, who has seen them all, and she was like, "Oh, look at Charlie, though, hottest guy in all of the films."
He just carries the whole thing. He's probably the best actor in the whole thing.
Definitely,
easily the most rounded character. Like, I really feel for Charlie. And he's so hot. It's a beautiful thing. I love Charlie. He's the best. That's the first time I've truly fallen in love with a policeman. But so Charlie, great. Love his kind of awkward relationship with his daughter. But what else do I think? It's the Cullen family. I think I like them. If I were to rank them, Rosalie is my favourite. I respect her haughtiness a lot. I like Jasper's hair.
Jasper's got some good hair, yeah.
He's got some good hair. I like his accent that seems to change every 5 minutes.
Yes, yeah.
Alice, annoying but cute. Should probably be dating Bella.
Yeah, well, I was told by a friend of the pod, Louise Blaine, she said that back in the day there was a lot of fanfic about Bella and Alice, and actually that would have been a way more interesting story, to be honest.
I see it. There's a chemistry there.
Yeah.
I definitely see it. Carlisle looks like Tom Cruise.
Yes.
Which is strange.
Yeah, kind of like Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise sort of mixed with, what's his name from Saw and The Princess Bride, like Cary Elwes. He's got like a bit of that to him as well.
I totally see it. Yeah, it's that combo. And then you've got Emmett, who's like vaguely Hemsworth-esque, like vampire himbo. And then Esme, I just completely forget all the time. She's not very memorable, but I mean, I definitely feel sorry for them for having to graduate from high school for the rest of their lives, and for Carlisle having to sort of work in the medical profession for the rest of his life. I mean, they're fine, aren't they? I find it interesting that there's the sort of recurring trope in vampire films that they always seem to be really wealthy. Like, they've got this crazy grand designs level.
Yeah.
I mean, do vampires just always manage to discover, like, the key to immense wealth? Do they? I
guess maybe they're really.
Do they invest in in antiques?
Are they antiques? Is the thing I was thinking. Maybe they just are really good at saving. You know, like they have hundreds and hundreds of years to save. Yeah, but it's true. They're always super wealthy, and I'm a bit confused about their family's backstory, right? But is it basically that the dad Carlisle just turned a whole bunch of people essentially and just like raised a family of vampires?
I think they were all people who were on the cusp of dying, and he was sort of saving them, but they're not saving them because they all hate being vampires, it would seem. They all seem deeply emo about it as well, and it wouldn't have been their first choice. But yeah, I think Carlisle sort of created this family. Jess, Bella's friend, is very concerned that it's incestuous, but of course none of them are actually related, so it is probably okay. But they are sort of stepbrothers and sisters, so is that weird?
I don't know. I've been watching so much House of the Dragon, Steph, that incest just goes over my head now. I'm like, whatever. It's fine.
It's
all
fine. Whatever. That's commonplace. Yeah, so we've got we've got them. Are there any other main characters? It's mainly Daddy Charlie.
Well, Jacob. We should talk about Jacob, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
But to be fair, it feels like he really comes into his own a bit more in the second one, doesn't he, in New Moon? But we do get glimpses of Jacob in this first film, played by Taylor Lautner. What do you think of Jacob?
Taylor Lautner. So he's a year younger than Bella, and he's clearly had a sort of crush on her since they were kids.
Yeah.
He's interesting that from the outset he sort of demonstrates that there's like this cultural divide between the kids going to Forks High School and then the kids on the Quillette reservation.
Yes.
And he's the one that sort of tells this story of the legend of the pale faces and
Yes.
the fact that the Quillette tribe is sort of descended from wolves. So he gives us that kind of backstory. I mean, I think his relationship in this film, even though it's with Bella, is, you know, he's there for like 5 minutes. I think it's clearly warmer and more natural than hers and Bella's. Just makes more sense to me.
Yeah, agreed.
They just sort of chatty, happy. Seems like there's some kind of personality going on there. But yeah, we don't see much until part 2.
Outrageous wig he's wearing in this first film.
Oh, there's some good wigs in these films.
There's some great wigs.
Bloody out. Beautiful wig.
One of them was really distracting in, I think, the third film. Bella is wearing a wig, really obviously, and I was so distracted by her wig throughout the whole film. I think because Kristen Stewart had to cut her hair for something else she was doing or something I read. But yeah.
Is that the third? Did you say the third one? Is that the one where Edward's sideburns get really out of control and they're sort of growing outwards?
What's going on?
Getting
with the
really
hair?
fluffy. It's totally different hairstyles across every film, and some of them are quite stressful.
But yeah, so I mean, there you go. Rewatching the first Twilight film again. How do you think it sort of holds up? And do you think that this is a film that like new generations of teenage girls are going to discover and fall in love with? Or is it already a bit kind of, I don't know, already a bit too passé almost in a way? I don't know.
Do you know what? It's a really hard question to answer. I think teenage girls have access to so much more that meets their interests now. There's a whole industry. I mean, it's everywhere. So if you have that many options, this probably might pass you by a bit more. It's very, I mean, I respect it hugely for the soundtrack. I think it's an absolute banger. There are some great needle drops in there. But again, there are a lot of bands that are very of that moment. But then at the same time, there's something about this franchise, isn't there, that just like taps into the human I don't know, genomes, and is doing something that's almost beyond. It's just beyond understanding. So maybe it will always have that effect. I'm not sure. But I do think in terms of, I think, you know, I think younger people, when these films first came out, probably forgave it for some of its, you know, forgave the flaws because it was just, I think it was just so grateful to be fed. It's like, wow, I'm being something that I feel, you know, something that really speaks to me. And I think there's just a lot more out there now, and people have done things since that are kind of similar, but probably better. So
probably a bit healthier too, I think.
Yeah. God, I hope so. Do you know what? That's true, actually. I think when I work with young people, I cannot believe how switched on they are emotionally, and they're just so with it, and they know they can call out a bad behaviour like that. So I bet there would be so many young girls would watch this now and be like, oh, hell no, I am not being gaslit by this guy.
Well, we were fed particularly kind of disturbing stuff as teenagers, I think our generation specifically, because like when the 2000s hit, it was like stuff aimed at girls was stuff like Twilight, and stuff aimed at boys was like American Pie and The Hangover. And it was like, it was either quite like toxic bro-y, or it was like quote unquote chick flicky essentially. And like that, you know, that, and you just, like you said, there's so much more now in like YA stuff or TV shows like Riverdale or whatever it might be, you know, like it feels like there's so much more interesting sex education or whatever, you know, like there's more interesting nuanced stuff for young people, I think, now, isn't there?
Yeah. So some of them have probably skipped this chapter. We should have interviewed a few. I should have done a survey because I'd be fascinated to know.
I know, right? So would I. Well, there we go. I think that's all we can say on this film for now. Let's leave Twilight there. Before we move on to the sequels, though, let's head on over to this week's Wild About Horror, because, of course, Freudian and psychoanalytic cinephile Mary Wilde had plenty of thoughts about Catherine Hardwicke's Twilight.
Hey Mike, Mary Wild calling, with many thoughts on the Twilight Saga, the 5 vampire-themed romance fantasy films based on 4 best-selling novels by Stephenie Meyer. Critical reception of the Twilight Saga is mixed. It is being called a genuine pop classic, with Stephenie Meyer's vision described as Bronte-esque. Writing in the Washington Post, Michael O'Sullivan said, quote, "Despite melodrama that at times is enough to induce diabetes, there's enough wolf whistle in these sexy, scary romps to please anyone." End quote. These films were obscenely successful at the box office, but were also extensively criticized. Mick LaSalle in the San Francisco Chronicle warned, quote, "Get ready for a bizarre soap opera pageant consisting of a succession of static scenes with characters loping into the frame to announce exactly what they're thinking." End quote. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun complained about the constant, unclever conversation between the 3 main characters and felt annoyed by the protracted gazes both Edward and Jacob give Bella throughout the franchise. Breaking Dawn Part 1 was especially slaughtered by film critics, with the Rotten Tomatoes consensus declaring it slow, joyless, and loaded with unintentionally humorous moments. The subsequent film as the saga's finale was reviewed as passably entertaining, though. Twilight evokes divergent, impassioned opinions. Some regard the film series as objectively badly made and cringe-inducing, while others feel sentimentally attached to it and credit it for modernizing the vampire trope. Regardless, the undeniable fact is that the Twilight Saga has grossed over $3.4 billion worldwide. It is inconceivably popular, and I'm here to ask, why? It's a gripping mystery, and my curiosity persists. What exactly does Twilight represent that has such a widespread appeal? What raw nerve does it repeatedly smash, rendering it irresistible and so fucking bankable, despite the style and content of it being, let's face it, bland, basic, and bordering on banal? Won't somebody tell me, what is this voodoo that Twilight do so well? Before I offer possible answers to these questions, as ever from a psychoanalytic perspective, I need to spend a little time gauging the psyche of the Twilight world creator herself, the legendary American novelist, Ms. Stephenie Meyer, whose vampire romance books, source material for the films, sold over 100 million copies and got translated into 37 languages. Stephenie Meyer was an avid young reader with no prior experience as an author when the idea for Twilight came to her in a dream on June 2nd, 2003, about a vampire who falls in love with a human girl and thirsts for her blood. Influenced by Jane Austen and William Shakespeare, Meyer wrote Twilight soon after. Following many rejections from publishers, she eventually landed a book deal, and the enormously profitable film adaptations ensued. Meyer's membership in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints shaped her novels. There is no drinking, smoking, or explicit sex in her books. Edward and Bella in Twilight remain sexually abstinent until marriage. Themes consistent with Meyer's Mormon values, including agency, mortality, temptation, and eternal life, are prominent in her work. Meyer met her future husband in Arizona when they were both children. They married in 1994 when she was only 21 years old. Together, they have 3 sons. I bring up this detail from her biography to underscore what a traditional gal Meyer is. She's from a world where certain things are restricted. This naturally creates a condition of longing, a permanent state of desire, and fantasizing about scenarios far out of her reach. And the more outlandish, the better. This is the divine nectar Ms. Meyer bottled, which in Lacanian psychoanalysis we refer to as l'objet petit a, the object A, the unattainable object of desire. It is sometimes called the object cause of desire, as it is the force that induces desire toward any particular object. The object A is an expression of the lack inherent in human beings, whose incompleteness and helplessness produce a quest for fulfillment beyond the satisfaction of biological needs. It is the object of desire which we seek in the other. Slavoj Žižek explains the object A in relation to Alfred Hitchcock's MacGuffin, saying, quote, "The MacGuffin is l'objet petit a, pure and simple, the lack, the remainder of the real that sets in motion the symbolic movement of interpretation, a whole at the center of the symbolic order, the mere appearance of some secret to be explained and interpreted." End quote. So what does this have to do with Twilight? Well, Bella gets shipped from Arizona to a small town located on Washington State's Olympic Peninsula to live with her father, Charlie, the town's police chief. Her mother, Renee, is remarried to Phil, a minor league baseball player whose career often keeps them on the road. Naturally, as a Freudian, I view this radical geographic move as a deep psychic wound. Bella's mother is rather cavalier, but at an unsymbolized level, this will have been felt as a painful maternal rejection. It will have hurt. What it creates is a chasm, a void that needs to be filled. Lo and behold, at her new high school, Bella finds the mysterious and aloof Cullen siblings very intriguing. She is seated next to Edward Cullen in biology class on her first day, but he seems repulsed by her. Edward's initially cold, detached, remote and indifferent persona becomes the perfect object onto which Bella can endlessly project unmet wishes, vanished in a haze when she aimed them at her impulsive, erratic, harebrained, absent mother, who literally chose the streets over her daughter. Edward Cullen, frozen in time, a century-old vampire looking like a teenage dreamboat, with his abundance of experience and knowledge, collected, wandering the world, gradually becomes obsessed with Bella. The guy at school no other girl could score wants her. This is top-tier teenage girl fantasy. Concerned audiences said Edward's behavior was troubling and problematic, that he was a toxic boyfriend sneaking into Bella's room at night to watch her sleep. But from the point of view of a kid whose mother shipped her thousands of miles away, the inordinately attentive, even stalkerish Edward fantasy is deeply gratifying. What Bella craves is attention, and Edward gives unfathomably large supplies of it to her. What a coup! Bella's boyfriend tells her that he can't get enough of her, that she's like his own personal brand of heroin. Heroin, of course, is always the object A, the installation of bottomless longing, ceaseless desire. He wants her that much. Eventually, Edward's whole world revolves around Bella, and he sets out to protect her in elaborately dangerous situations that get progressively weirder. Bella, a girl who spent most of her childhood parenting her chaotic, unruly mother, is now the recipient of infinite protection from her boyfriend and his whole gang, shielded by his wealthy and powerful immortal family. Being loved up is Bella's primary interest. I don't say this to mock girly preoccupations. I'm on her side and rooting for her to follow her desire, which is the ultimate ethical act in psychoanalysis. At Cullen HQ, vampires appear always in perfect hetero couple poses. This is a constant throughout the series. The steadfast, verging on waxwork exhibition of eternal love in the Cullen household covers up the torn fabric of Bella's broken family. At this rate, who even cares that the Cullens are undead? In this fantasy, Bella gets what she needs: safety, love, community, responsible elders. But what she wants is tantalizingly just out of reach: sex with her boyfriend. Because Edward is old school and wants to wait until their wedding night. As if that weren't a high enough dose of the object A, Twilight serves us a delectable love triangle. Bella is ardently pursued by not only a vampire, but also a wolf. Jacob goes on to imprint Renesmee, Bella's half-human, half-vampire baby. This storyline understandably has caused outrage, and most people feel that Jacob's interest in a literal baby is unforgivably creepy. I get it. I draw the line at child grooming too. But if we're still in Bella's sordid fantasy space, projecting onto an ex-boyfriend who continues to pine for her and even pursues her daughter just to have some semblance of closeness to Bella, well, this tracks with the concept of the object A. The object cause of desire that animates the narrative, always in Bella's direction. The extended honeymoon scenes in Breaking Dawn Part 1 are fascinating. Edward and Bella break the bed. The sex they're having is so rough that they trash the room in the process. Nothing untoward is ever shown, of course, but everything is implied. The film makes it clear that Bella is no pillow princess. She leans into the passionate side of her wedding night. A central fixation of the series is the unmitigated protection of Bella Swan. To ensure she's kept far from harm, sworn enemies, vampires and werewolves come together. Later, the safeguarding of Renesmee, an extension of Bella herself, becomes priority number one. An international confederacy of elite, glamorous vampires drop everything and rush to defend Bella's family. It's too easy to interpret Bella as a megalomaniac, delusional about her own importance. No, this remains about desire. I would argue that this intense desire displayed by a teenage girl is the most disturbing horror element in the Twilight films. That a teenage girl is written by a female author as being capable of this frankly deranged level of desire is the real taboo. That she should dare to believe she's worthy of this amount of love is the fear object, perhaps only unconsciously hinted at by the writer and directors. Our society forecloses the desires of women and girls. In relation to this, Twilight is taboo breaking. And this is why it utterly killed at the box office. Women feel seen in these films. Our pleasure and desire are front and center. Men are shocked to their very core and intrigued in equal measure, realizing they're not the only players in the game. I'll end by stating in no uncertain terms that I'm a Twilight fan, and firmly Team Edward, by the way. No hate. Long live the teenage girl imagination. May her daring spirit carry her beyond the permitted limits of the forest. May topless, sparkling torsos comfort her. May the thousands of hours obsessively daydreaming be worth it. May her crush protect her where her caregivers failed her. This is the snow-covered hill I'll die on, so pitch that tent and tell Jacob I'm gonna need some of that body heat action. Till next time.
A big thank you to the wonderful Mary Wilde. And don't forget, if you want to hear more of Mary's takes on other genre films, be sure to sign up to her Patreon for regular bonus content. Patreon.com/Mary Wilde.
You think that guy's still out there?
What's up with you and this clown all of a sudden? You're like obsessed.
They never found his body. What if he decides to come back here?
I wouldn't worry about it.
Wait a minute, aren't you that guy from the costume shop?
Sir, what are you doing?
It wasn't me. He was covered in blood on his shirt and his hands when he got here.
That was a little clip you just heard there from Terrifier 2, the sequel to the infamous Art the Clown schlocky original slasher. The sequel dropped in the last few weeks. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes long, and the world has gone absolutely mad for it. Like, it's sold out of places. It made a shit ton of money in its opening weekend. People love this franchise and people love Art the Clown. But what did Brad and Becky and Louise and I think of Terrifier 2? That is one of the many films that we covered on this month's edition of Fresh Blood. Now, Fresh Blood, for anyone who doesn't know, is a monthly review show that we do on Patreon. It's available for $5 patrons and upwards. Every month, at the beginning of the month, me, Brad, Becky and Louise will do quick-fire, spoiler-free reviews and recommendations for everything new and fresh in the world of horror, including films on streaming, in cinemas, on physical media. We even talk about video games, true crime and television box sets. Everything gets covered between the four of us. It's always a brilliantly fun discussion, and I know that patrons really enjoy listening to that every month. So if you want to tune in to our regular review show and get insight into what you should be streaming or paying your money to see in the world of horror from month to month, then sign up to our Patreon. Patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. $5 per month, that's about £4 per month, will get you access to over 200 bonus episodes, including our monthly Fresh Blood strands and a whole bunch of other stuff. Or you could go one level higher to $10, which means you will get all of that as well as access to our exclusive mini seasons. That's where we do franchise retrospectives and filmmaker retrospectives. We've covered Alfred Hitchcock across 10 or 11 episodes. We covered all of the Halloween films, all the Saw films, all the Hellraiser films. We even managed to cover the whole of Twin Peaks from beginning to end. So if you sign up at a $10 level, you'll get access to all of that as well. Patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. Everybody who signs up will also get a little shout out on the main podcast as a thank you. So speaking of, I'm going to give everybody who signed up in the spooky month of October a very special thanks. So a big thank you to WP Davis, Julie Nicholson, Daniel Coors, Mike Olsen, Andy, Brian, Richard Cubitt, John Black, Giuseppe Visoretti, Holly Tren, James Gethins, A. Jones, Jess Gray, Steve Caton, Jenna Opsal, Angelina Lacelli, Gage Miller, Arturo Cardenas, Kane, Barry Latimore Quinn, Ghost Cat, Luke M, Erin, Roy Burns III, Ali Wright, Andrew Thompson, Alexander Heigl, Jessica Draper, Jason Strong, Renee, Alex Paliuka, Andy Aldridge, Andy Pearsall, Stephen Perez, Faye, Rebecca, James Hewlett, Terry Woods, Ethan Safi, Sally McAdams, Martha Hope Stafford, Chad Nilsson, S. Thomas, Alex Hansen, Catherine Chandler, Rose, Chris Heil, Richard Stewart, Rebecca Patterson, John Westwood Saltmarsh, Joshua Morato, Seeley Price, Christian Weyes, John Ware, Sean McClure and John Collins. A huge thank you to all of those brilliant people and generous people for signing up to our Patreon in the month of October. And if you want to join them and get treated to regular bonus content and more, then sign up now. Patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. Okay, let's return to the second half of my discussion with Steph McKenna. Now that we've got the first film out of the way, we are going to run through the Twilight sequels. Now, Steph, I didn't sit through all of these fucking sequels for nothing, so let's talk through some of the sequels quickly. We don't have to go too in-depth, but 1 year later, we get New Moon from 2009, directed by Chris Veidt. This movie... Now, this one, off the top of my head, this is the one that mainly focuses on Bella's relationship with Jacob, doesn't it? Because doesn't Edward basically bugger off at the beginning? Because he's like, I can't be around you, I'm leaving, or something. Is that right?
Yeah,
and he just goes.
Storms off, leaves her in the forest to literally curl up on the floor and die. He's gone.
And Bella is so miserable. Oh my God, if you think she's miserable in the first one, she is the most sulky in the second one. It's unbearable.
Mike, this film really spoke to me. I have to say, I have such a respect for that scene where she's sitting in the chair and the seasons are changing with Likey Lee playing in the background. And I was like, shit, this was me. So it's ridiculous. of the 5 films, this is the film where the least happens. Like, it's fundamentally a messy breakup, a new relationship, and a weird suicide attempt. Nothing else happens. There's no vampiric activity or action generally. However, I am quite invested in the melodrama and the relationship between Bella and Jake. So I actually quite like this one.
Well, the frustrating thing is about Bella and Jake is that, like you said, Jake is definitely better for her, right? Like, I would be Team Jacob in theory, except that Bella actually isn't that fussed about Jacob, is she, throughout the whole thing? Like, I kind of thought that at some point there was going to be like an actual romance or relationship with Jacob. But there never really is there? It's basically just like he yearns for her, she yearns for Edward, and that's sort of it.
She leads him on a bit. Yeah, she just leads him on a bit. I just don't understand how she wasn't completely... There's that amazing moment in this film, and I remember this in the cinema, when Jake takes off his shirt for no reason,
so
really.
Funny.
He just whips it off.
He just gets cross and takes his shirt off and runs into the woods. That's all Jacob does throughout these 5 films, basically.
The noise that came out of the audience when I watched that in the cinema, it was honestly like air coming out of a balloon. It was like, whoo! Like, it's just people falling all over the place. But yeah, he gets very angry and takes his shirt off a lot. And she's still not fussed. I mean, this guy's got hobbies. He can, like, fix up a bike. Yeah. He'll go to the cinema. Like, yeah. This dude wants to do things, but she's still not interested.
It's true. He's this, like, chiseled, friendly, very handsome man who has hobbies, who can fix her motorbike, fix her car. It's kind of a bit more like we're in a kind of Nicholas Sparks novel or something, I think, in this one. But yeah, she's just not fussed, absolutely not fussed. And all of his, like, his family, all of them are shirtless the entire time, basically. And it's like that. It's like that incredible.
Because they run hot, Mike.
It's so funny. It's just like, it's the abs film. This film, basically, isn't it? It's so funny. So, you know, again, like, good for it for having a very, like, unapologetic female gaze, you know, which, again, like, we didn't get that much of back in the day at this point in time, did we, in movies, you know?
I'm totally here for it. I love it. I'm here for that.
And this movie also ends, it has a kind of final act that takes place in Italy, right? And is this where we meet Michael Sheen's character and the group? What's that group called? The Voltaire or something?
The Volturi.
The Volturi, yeah, that's it.
They're mildly interesting, aren't they? They love classic subjects like the arts and science, and they love upholding the law. They think they're like Tory vampires, really.
That's right. Yes, they
are. And we've got Martin Sheen as Arrow, who's always a joy. And then is it Dakota Fanning?
Yes, Dakota Fanning.
As Jane,
yeah.
Sort of cold businesswoman, inflicts pain.
She's good. She's quite scary. Yeah, she's good.
She is. They look more like vampires, don't they? They kind of stand out from regular people. They're noticeably paler and sort of golden eyes. I quite like the idea of a vampire authority. You've got... Yeah. Are they the authority in True Blood? I think they might be, but they're sort of enforcers of the vampire status quo.
Yes,
they're the conservatives in the conservative film.
Right, exactly. And you do get, I think you do get that in True Blood, don't you? And you get it in stuff like What We Do in the Shadows, which I'm also currently binging as well. But there's always like a kind of vampire council or vampire government and that kind of thing, which I love. And you're right, Michael Sheen, always a joy. Like, the second he appears in this film, it sort of brings a new life to it a little bit, doesn't it?
Does.
Because he is absolutely camping it up to the max. It's the most camp I've ever seen Michael Sheen be, and he's brilliant. And like, yeah, it's a bit of breath of fresh air in this otherwise very broody second movie, isn't it?
Yeah, that 3-minute scene is probably the best bit. And then the bit before with the suicide attempt, it's just... I mean, I think that's probably the worst scene for me out of all of the films, is this... It just doesn't make... I mean, it's just so over the top. It's like, Edward's gone to kill himself. But why? It's like, he thinks you're dead. He's gone to kill himself. He's going to throw himself in the sunlight. It's like, what? What absolutely bananas story is this? There's actually no... I mean, that's the climax of the film. is that he
Yes,
might sparkle
yes.
in front of everyone. That is the big climax, and it's just, there's nothing there.
Unbelievable. It was, I'm afraid to say, my least favourite of the 5, New Moon. I really
totally
struggled with this
understand.
one. And what do you think of the direction generally? I mean, like, has it lost its blue filter by this point? Have we lost the blue?
Yeah, we have. So only the first film is blue.
Yes.
The colour palette's totally different here. It's like full colour. And I think if you watch it after watching Twilight, it's like really visually striking. There's a lot of like red and green and purple, and it's very clearly, I mean, I guess is it kind of representing the warmth of the Quillette tribe, like the werewolves, because they're warm, maybe. Might be reading too much into that.
No,
as
you're
well,
probably right. They're a bit more hot-blooded than the cold vampires, aren't they?
So
That's a good shout.
got that kind
That's a good shout.
colour in her life. I do think there are actually, to be fair, in the first film and in this film, there are some very beautiful settings. The beach and the forest. There's a few sort of cool. There's like a scene with Victoria, who's that kind of jaded, angry enemy vampire in the forest, being chased by Jacob with sort of loads of slow-mo and green and the red of her hair. And I think that looks kind of pretty stylish and cool. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we lose all the close-ups.
Yes.
But we keep the slow-mo because important.
It's very important, yeah. Yes, you're right, because the where they filmed the town of Forks apparently is now so like people do these like pilgrimages to it and come and visit it every year.
Shall we
this
go?
Little town where we should go, shouldn't we? And we'll do like spider monkeying around the woods. That moment in the first film as well, when he gives her a piggyback and just like runs with her, is so funny. I mean, that's the other thing we haven't talked about. The CGI, I'm afraid to say, is like not great. It's of its time, maybe we'll say, right?
It's pretty naff, isn't it? What did you think of the werewolves, though? Because
not great, I would say. Actually, they just look so CGI, don't they? I think like there's some good moments. I think maybe in a couple of the later films, the transformations can look quite cool in some of it, but then when you actually see the werewolves in broad daylight close up, they do just look like video game characters or something, I think, anything else you want to mention on New Moon, or should we move on to Eclipse?
I honestly can't even remember which one's which anymore, and we're only on number 2, so I think that's fine.
Yeah, this is even harder than the Phantasm sequels, isn't it? Let's
really
talk
is.
about Eclipse then, from 2010. I've got to actually admit, speaking of, I don't really remember what happens in this one, Steph. I vaguely remember this one being a bit more fun and interesting than the previous one, but I don't really remember what happens in Eclipse.
Isn't that weird? Because I'm exactly the same. It's like a blind spot for me, and I'm not sure why, because objectively more happens in this film than the previous one, and yet I remember the previous one more. So this I remember for the sort of Edward getting cuckolded in a tent thing, and
that's funny. That's a funny moment.
That's funny.
And also, for the first time in this series, there was actually something that felt a bit almost borderline queer, because like this is the other thing about Twilight films, right, is that we've talked a lot about how vampires are queer in almost every vampire movie, but maybe these are the least queer vampire films of all time, because again there is that kind of very like Christian conservatism almost to them. But when they all got in a tent together, I was like, here we go, it's hotting up.
Yeah, right. Honestly though, you do begin to think like, yeah, where is this love triangle going? I mean, Jacob and Edward, they're obsessed with each other, aren't they?
They really are. Bella might as well not be there sometimes.
She just doesn't exist. There's, that bit in the tent is... So that's that's the thing that I remember. And I imagine that's spawned a lot more fanfic.
Yes.
Millions of fanfic stories. We get the kind of concept of newborn. There's a bit more vampire action in this. So we've got the concept of newborns as these sort of new vampires that are much stronger and more unstable. Technically, I think more people die. There's this sort of weird use of kind of like glass when vampires die. They sort of shatter, don't they? It's kind of cool, but it's kind of also very censored and sanitized.
It's again, it's super sanitized, isn't it? It's a kind of cool effect, But why are they like glass when they get beheaded? That's really weird, isn't it?
No idea. Couldn't possibly show blood. But it's that kind of like the love triangle is the central plot, and there always is a kind of little detour away by way of a kind of mild threat or enemy, but it never really means much.
No, absolutely. You're right. This one particularly, I think, has the love triangle front and center, doesn't it? I think. Because then by the time we get to the fourth one, this is it, right? This is Edward and Bella getting married and then finally having sex. And then immediately Bella is pregnant.
That's how it worked. Weren't you taught that in school? You have sex
That's
once,
how it works.
and you will be up the duff. You sit on a toilet seat, you will be up the duff. That is exactly.
This is maybe my favourite, Steph. I love four.
I can kind of see what I felt like I had to text you in advance and just get you to stick with it, because I thought if he just goes through this wedding, which does go on for a long time. Oh my
God.
And then through this honeymoon, which is mostly them playing chess, I thought, he's not going to make it through. I have to make him stay to the last 25 minutes because, it's
bonkers.
The first hour and a half is so boring. I mean, it really is boring, unless you like looking through like wedding magazines.
That is what it's like. Yeah.
It's essentially like, flicking through a wedding magazine and looking at like interior design, and then the worst honeymoon ever where Edward has been a virgin for 100 years and is still finding excuses not to do it. Like he's still just like, there's the bit where he's just there by the bed and he's like, are you tired?
Oh.
Like, she's not tired. She just wants to have sex with you.
I know.
And then we get, after, bigging it up for 4 films, we get no sex really. But we do get a broken bed.
We get well, that's hilarious too. He breaks the bed as if we're watching the most passionate thing we've ever seen, and it's the most vanilla love making. It's not even sex; it's love making scene, right?
It was.
And he breaks the bed. So it's like, didn't earn that, breaking the bed.
Just
absolutely didn't earn that.
Oh, I love this cuddle. It's like...
Yeah, this is the best cuddle I've ever had. Oh, God. It is. It's absolutely hilarious. But do you know what? Like, I was so... kind of gobsmacked by the sexless sex scene that I was kind of enjoying this film at this point. And also I was laughing a lot at how miserable she was at her own wedding. Like walking down the aisle, she looked like she just didn't want to be there.
No one wanted to be there. All the guests looked morose. Charlie was going to cry. She looked like she was just going to pass out. Like, it just looked miserable, didn't it? For such a clearly expensive wedding too. No one wants to... It just... For stuff that they're supposed to feel so passionate about, they just are hating every second of it.
It's
and then
amazing.
And then, as you say, Bella falls pregnant, and we get this very pro-life story where she's fighting for her own choice to have her baby, whilst everyone else calls it a thing and wants it to die. And she wants to give it life, but then she also wants to punish it by calling it fucking Renesmee.
Renesmee. It's not a name.
I like the way she. I like the way she kind of acts like she's reached this really profound conclusion. She's like, I've been playing with names.
Yeah.
Renee and Esme. Renesmee.
Oh, it's amazing. And I couldn't tell if that was supposed to be funny or not, because like Jacob does react to it kind of like Renesmee. But then everyone else is just like, yeah, great name. Great name. Yeah.
I felt like that was a really tongue-in-cheek moment where they knew they had to keep the name from the book, but everyone knows it's absolutely ridiculous. So someone has to kind of break the wall there and go,
yeah.
But and we've got also this sort of backdrop of like bloody talking wolves. So it's like the animals of Farthing Wood at the same time, and it's all very boring. And then you're an hour and a half in, like losing the will to live, and then Bella's spine just snaps in half.
Honestly, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. We were suddenly in like a David Cronenberg body horror movie at this point. Her spine breaks, and then, as if it couldn't get any more weird, suddenly we need to talk about this whole imprinting thing, Steph, right? Like, what is the deal with the wolves being able to imprint on people? Because then we get this reveal, right, where Jacob imprints on this baby. But yeah, what does it mean to actually imprint as a wolf?
So to imprint as a wolf, it kind of means that you see someone and from that very moment, they are your entire world. So you just want to be with them and you're just obsessed with them. You want to be with them forever. You want to look after them. You want to care for them. And until this moment, again, I had just taken that as a very on the nose metaphor for being in love and being in a relationship. And, you know, Edward's kind of imprinted on... Bella and Edward have kind of imprinted on each other. It's that kind of thing. And, you know, kind of led to assume, or Jacob's kind of trying to work out whether he's sort of imprinted on Bella because she's his whole world. And then he sees a newborn baby, Mike, and he's like, you know what? This is my moment.
Imprinting.
I'm going
to imprint that baby.
And I think they even do it in the film. They're like, what? That's not normal. And he's like, no. It's not a weird thing. It's not a sex thing. And you're like...
It's a bit weird, though, Jacob. It's a bit weird.
It's a bit weird. Fine. At the moment, you're with this baby and you're like, there's nothing weird there. But do you know, there is something weird about dating someone that you looked after as a baby.
Yes,
that is weird.
That is weird. It's very weird.
That's some weird shit. Who is it? Is it Woody Allen does that? I can't remember.
Oh,
but,
yeah. Woody Allen's done that. Yeah.
We've worked out that's a weird thing to do. So it might not be weird right now, but it's going to get weird in future.
Absolutely. It's so funny. It is... Considering this is, like you say, a film where relatively little happens and it's only the first half of a book and it's still a 2-hour film, it does get absolutely mental in like that last act.
It's actually quite shocking. I think you're so unprepared for it because you're bored out of your mind and you're like, nothing is going to happen because nothing has happened. And you're in this sort of weird bored stasis. And then all her bones snap and then suddenly Edward is eating an umbilical cord with his teeth.
Oh, brilliant.
And then she dies and he's trying to resuscitate her on this blood-soaked bed for like 10 minutes. Ages. It honestly reminds me of the shock I initially felt. I mean, maybe not quite to the same extent, but do you remember that shock you initially felt when Joyce dies in Buffy and you're like,
God,
what?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
It's kind of that. You're like, what? Whoa, she is dead.
She's properly dead.
Fully dead.
Yeah.
Properly. There's her corpse and it's on screen for a long time. And it's just like amazing. This fantasy is completely imploded and we're left with the horrifying reality of it all. But it is like fully batshit.
Absolutely mental. And then, of course, the kind of cliffhanger ending is that she comes back to life as a vampire, right? She goes vampire. And that's sort of where that part 1 ends. And then we get 1 year later, 2012, Breaking Dawn Part 2, the final chapter at last of this saga, where we now have Vampire Bella, right? What do you think of this movie?
We have to spend a lot of time with a CGI child, and I just don't understand why they couldn't get real babies and children in these films.
It's really weird. Really weird. Why has that baby got such a weird face? It's really strange.
Totally weird, isn't it? Very, very odd. I know that's not the biggest takeaway, but it's the thing that always sticks with me. So Bella's a vampire. The tension between the tension between Jacob and Edward has apparently entirely evaporated now and isn't somehow worse because Jacob's just told Edward that he loves his newborn child. Apparently it's not an issue.
Yes.
So there's a big anticlimax there.
Yeah. Really weird. Really weird. And then there is this story. Michael Sheen's back, right? This is quite interesting because the baby is like, and this is something we've talked about before in the vampire series. This is touched upon in an interview with the vampire too. This idea of a vampire child being this kind of almost like abomination that shouldn't exist, right? And that they think that this child needs to be, the vampire council thing, whatever they're called, decide that this baby needs to be destroyed, basically, right? And so this is hilarious because it feels like for most of the film we're gearing up for this epic battle, and Bella and Edward and the Cullens spend most of the film like recruiting friends and family members, and we get all these new characters that are going to come and join this fight. And then we get a fight, but it turns out to not be a real fight because it's just somebody seeing what could happen in the future, and then they all just make friends and go home, basically, right?
That is literally it. I mean, I have to say the twist that it's all Alice's vision,
yes,
and that the fight scene never happens is, I remember being quite surprised by. You genuinely don't see that one coming. Like Carlisle dying, genuinely a shock.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, you're right. It's all, none of it's actually happened. It was all a dream, and then it's sort of nicely tied in a bow. The Volturi is sort of like, oh, well, that's fine. We're fine. We'll go home.
It's really funny. What an interesting anticlimax. I mean, I guess it's not an anticlimax because you still do see the battle. But again, it's just hilarious how once again it ends up being such a low stake story when actually that battle turns out not to have happened, and that they all just go, oh, okay, let's just leave it and not worry about it. It's just hilarious. What a weird way to end your whole franchise in a way, you know?
Yeah.
But yes, but I guess because basically fundamentally they realise that this child, Renesmee, is not actually a vampire, or she's a human. She grows, right? She's growing up, so she's not going to stay young forever or something.
Yeah, because everyone's very, very concerned that she's growing at such a rapid rate that she's just going to age and die within like 2 years.
Yes.
But fortunately, because everything is being tied up in a nice little bow, turns out she will grow to a certain age, and then she will just stop and live to forever at her, like, you know, whatever the peak age is when you're at the peak of your adolescence or something, because there's another example of a vampire out there who has done the same thing. So phew, it's all going to be fine.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
Great.
The end, basically,
the
right?
End.
The end.
That's literally it.
Edward and Bella live happily ever after together as vampires. Jacob is kind of chill by this point because he's imprinted on their child, so he's just going to wait for her to come of age.
No one's worried about that. That's not weird at all, is it?
No one's concerned about that at all. No, that's fine. Just ignore that. And they all live happily ever after, and everything comes to an end with Christina Perri's 1,000 Years, little pop ditty to round it all off.
And I still welled up at that little pop song at the end. I literally don't know what's wrong with me.
That song, this is random, and I don't know why, but Rihanna has that song as her alarm. And she has for as long as I've known her. So we've been together for nearly 10 years, and that has always been her alarm song. But you know when you hear a song that is your alarm. So when that song came on at the end of the film, I was just like, oh, just like gave me not so nice feelings. So I wasn't crying in the way that you were, Steph, during those closing credits. But yeah, it's really funny.
Did Rihanna have that from Twilight?
I actually don't know if it was to do with Twilight or just to whether she liked the song at the time when it was on the radio. I'm not sure, but it's just she just said it's just. But it wasn't from the. Was it from the film that you liked the song?
In the film, and I was just like, this is just like an easy thing to wake up to. It's not very jolly.
It's just an easy thing to wake up to. It's a nice, like, relaxing morning song.
Beautiful song.
Go. Yeah. Thanks for the clarification. There you go, a little cameo there. So Rihanna could overhear us talking about that. So there you go. So yeah, I mean, like, it all comes to a nice little end. You still got emotional, Steph. So there you go. It's still working its magic on you, clearly.
The power of these films is not to be reckoned with, because I was still getting a bit choked up. Like, it's been a journey.
It's been such a journey. I'm going to ask you what I asked you after the Phantasm films, which is, how would you rank the 5 Twilight films, Steph?
Oh, that's really tough.
Yeah.
Twilight is number 1 because I could fill a whole podcast talking about Twilight, but we couldn't have done it with any of the other films, I would argue. Would I put Breaking Dawn Part 1 as the second one? Even though I hate a good an hour and a half of it, but that final segment is just quite good. So maybe I would put that as the second. Then I do actually quite like New Moon for the drama of it all, even though it's very boring. Then maybe Breaking Dawn Part 2 because there is at least some sort of fight scene, and then Eclipse at the end because I can't remember it.
Don't remember anything about it. Yeah.
No,
I mean, that's
how about
fair.
you?
That's fair. I would go My number one would be Breaking Dawn Part 1. That's my number. I'm sorry to say, that was the least bored I was in all 5 films. Then I would say the original Twilight.
Yeah.
Then I would say Breaking Dawn Part 2.
Fair.
Then I would say Eclipse, but I don't remember what happens in it, but I vaguely remember enjoying it more than New Moon. So I'm going to put Eclipse there, and then New Moon was the one where I started to lose the will to live by the final act of that film.
And you were only in the second one. That must have really been fun for you to be like, ooh, I've got another 3 left. Yeah. So sorry about that.
That was bleak. It's all
what
right.
A trip, though,
I'm glad I've done it. I know. I'm glad I've done it. I'm glad I've seen the films. I now see, I can be engaged in the conversation about 20 years too late about Twilight,
It's never too late. It's never too late. And it's a rite of passage. And now you can have an opinion on them because you've seen them at least.
I love it. I can engage in the discourse. That's all I want, really. So there you go. Steph, thank you so much. My final question for you is, what is your favourite vampire movie?
Oh my God. Why was I not expecting that at all? Do you know what? I think it is actually Let the Right One In.
Oh, yeah.
Because that is one of my favourite films, full stop.
Yeah.
And actually, I really love the book as well. And they're very similar but very different. But that I absolutely love Let the Right One In. It gets me every time, and it's just an absolutely beautiful film. So can't believe it came out the same year as Twilight.
Amazing, right? It is amazing, but yeah, it is. What a perfect movie, right? It's just perfect. Yeah. There you go. Well, thank you, Steph, so much. Thank you once again for taking one for the team and coming to chat about these 5 films with me. It's been such a joy. And just remind people where they can find you and more of your stuff and your podcast out there online.
So you can find me on Twitter at Steph McKenna, and you can listen to me talking about TV and film and music and other pop culture things on The Thirst.
Amazing. Steph, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And that's it for this week, and that's it for our Twilight episode. Thank you so much, if any of you did listen, for listening. And a big thank you one more time to my brilliant guest, Steph McKenna. So I would love to hear your thoughts. Just be kind, but please do send me your thoughts. What did you think of this week's episode? And what do you think of the Twilight movies? Please do get in touch. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd, all the socials. If you want to discuss this week's episode with fellow listeners, join the discussion group. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group, which you can find on Facebook, or you can join the Evolution of Horror Discord. You can find this podcast in all the usual podcast platforms, and if you get a spare moment, I'd be so grateful if you could drop us a little rating or review on Apple Podcasts, as that really helps us get discovered by new listeners. So, on to next week then, and we're going a little bit more serious again next week. So we move into the 2010s. We are very nearly at the end of our journey through the evolution of the vampire, but there are still a handful of absolute bangers left to discuss. So next week, I'm going to be joined in the first half of the discussion by Michael Leader to discuss Jim Jarmusch's Only Lovers Left Alive from 2013. Then in the second half of the episode, I'll be joined by a brand new guest, Maha Al-Badrawi, to discuss Anna Lily Amirpour's A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night from 2014. That is quite the double bill, and I cannot wait. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.